What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time.
Oliver Stone was on Useful Idiots not too long ago, and he had a segment talking about JFK. He has a new movie out about JFK assassination, and I just kind of wanted to watch the video, react with you guys, follow along a little bit.
We're so excited. Your film.
Sorry about this whole situation. I'll fix
Lots of
this
questions about it.
eventually.
I just wanted to ask you.
My setup won't be so
This
shitty.
is JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass, and we're going to get into what's so interesting about it in a moment, but yes.
So yes, your film JFK Revisited Through the Looking Glass, which is Showtime, was excellent, and wanted to know, you had already done the JFK feature film, which was of course based a lot on history. What, without giving everything away to people who haven't seen it, what to you stands out as the major things that have been revealed since the release of that film?
I knew you'd ask me something like that. You know, it's hard to sum it all up because it's actually a 4-hour film. We cut it to 2 hours for the purposes of Showtime, but the 4 hours come in.
Are you going to release the 4 hours?
Yeah.
No, it will.
I hope they release 4-hour cut of his new film. Also, I forget what the name of the series was. It was like the untold history, the unspoken history of the United States, something like that. But Oliver Stone, just a few years back, did a great, almost Ken Burns style documentary on United States history. And it's absolutely amazing and fascinating because it isn't through the lens of pro-imperialist, pro-capitalist propaganda. It's actually a very sober look at what was going on in our history.
It may play a few theaters in America, but it's really a platform thing, and it is a lot it's a lot to digest. In short, I mean, just to answer briefly your question, it goes back after '91. The film was made. It was a dramatization, and it resulted in the Assassination Records Review Board being appointed by Congress, an act of legislation, the JFK Records Act, which is pretty significant to a film.
Yeah.
The board, six academics roughly, existed they worked for 4 years, from '94 to '98, and they had the power to declassify documents. They were supposed to declassify most everything, I guess, but didn't get there.
Now, how often is that happening in the United States? I mean, one of the most obvious things is the JFK stuff, and they keep delaying it, even though it's been like fucking, a million years since that happened. Think about all the other stuff they should be telling us, and they just classify and bury. We're run by criminals. I mean, they murdered a sitting president. The CIA murdered JFK.
They got about 60,000 documents, and about, I gather, 20,000 are still not seen by them. And they had some very good technical experts working with them who dissected the details, and that's very important in this deal. So what we do is go back over the whole thing again and review the actual proof, the evidence against Oswald that he did it alone, and we come out showing that all the evidence from day one, the bullets, the rifle, the fingerprints, everything is tainted. Nothing would be held up in court. It'd be thrown out of court on the basis just of chain of custody.
A sitting United States president is murdered, and not a single piece of evidence would be able to stand up in court because the chain of custody, or, the knowledge of where it's been from the moment the crime was committed until now, is not clear or verified, meaning that anyone could have touched it, anyone could have done anything to it. It might not even be a real piece of evidence.
On top of that, there are witnesses that were not interviewed by the Warren Commission. Some were interviewed and their testimony was slightly changed. We found 3...
Refusing to interview witnesses and changing witness testimony. Does that sound? You know? If they did this to JFK all those years ago, what do you think they're doing today? Do you think they just stopped doing evil things, the CIA? I also love to, you know, in this country we always hear, you know, Putin murders journalists, Saudi Arabia murders journalists, blah, 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 blah. We're a better country. Bro, our president was murdered by our own government. And no one talks about that still. And we act like it never happened almost. Or if we do act like it happened and just forget about it, we just do selective amnesia about that. Or we just pretend it was so long ago and everything is good now, even though everything's worse than ever. We were closer to a democracy when they blew JFK's head off. We're full-blown under the control of the type of people who murdered JFK at this point.
We didn't find a researcher found in the 1990s 3 secretaries who'd seen the whole thing from the 4th floor. And they claimed that they left right away to go downstairs to see what was going on after the bullets hit. They saw no Oswald on those stairs. It's physically impossible.
Contradicts with Hoover told Johnson at the time.
Yeah, well, Hoover didn't know. I mean, he was just, he said that Oswald did it right away, but Oswald could not have gotten from the 6th floor, put the rifle away, stashed all that stuff, gotten out of there with all those boxes, and run down those stairs in far more than a minute. He would have taken longer, more than a minute or two. These girls were downstairs in about 30 seconds to a minute. So they saw no Oswald on the stairs, and the people coming up the stairs didn't see him. So right there, you have to question, was Oswald on the 6th floor?
Right.
And I don't believe he was, but beside that, you know, the autopsy was a ruse, was a farce. It was done by military guys who didn't want anything. They were put in charge, and you're not supposed to have an autopsy run by the military, you see. So the autopsists had no power to really do what they wanted, but they were incompetent anyway. There was a lot of great people who could have done it around. They were not asked. It was a strange autopsy with Dr.
So you're not even going to have the most renowned doctors do the autopsy on the leader of the free world after they blew his head off in broad daylight. Roger.
Photos. Now the photos we know are doctored because the photographer at the autopsy, the official one, Stringer, was interviewed by the board, and he was shown the pictures that were shown, the official pictures of Kennedy's skull, and he said, "Those are not taken by me. Those are not the shots I took."
Wow.
So you have a doctored photo situation, and
so the photos submitted as evidence of JFK's body parts, the official ones aren't even real. They're doctored or fake because the photographer who was there taking these official photos in real time confirmed that the photos presented were not the photos he took.
Shows the big deal, of course. I don't know, Katie, you're too young to remember, but when you see the Zapruder film, you see his head he's shot from the front right here, and the back of his head blows out. It's pretty gruesome, and that's a shot from the front. And the Warren Commission was stuck from day one.
Just think about how little our government cares about the lies they feed us. This man's head exploded out the back. It's on film. It goes like that. And they're trying to say it was a bullet going this way that did that. I don't know. I've seen a few Hollywood films. Usually the entry wound is small and the exit wound is larger. That's usually how ballistics work. And if you go like this, it's usually because you were hit in the front of your face. If someone punches you in the back of the head, you don't do this. You do this. I mean, It's crazy. It's crazy. What kind of government? They don't give a shit. They just fucking will lie and say anything.
This idea that he was hit from the rear by 3 bullets.
And you believe what's in the news today. And you believe that Russia is evil, China's evil, Assad is evil, all the terrorists in Syria are good people, they're moderate rebels, they're not, Al-Qaeda affiliates. There's so much propaganda out there. And it's become common in our culture now on the left to believe people from the FBI or the CIA. These are the people who will murder your democratically elected president in this country, and they do it on the regular in other countries. And you want to believe them about Russia or about Trump? Give me a fucking break.
And it's just physically impossible when you examine all the evidence of not only the Zapruder film, but everything that happened in the autopsy to prove that those 3 bullets were the ones that killed, that did all this damage. He had to be shot from the other side, from the front as well as the rear. The rear, he could have been shot from another window on another building. It didn't have to be from the 6th floor. 6th floor was a very difficult shot because there was a tree that was growing right there. All these things they're all details, like a Sherlock Holmes would break into the case and he'd say, this. That all adds up. It's accumulation of details. And that bothers me because from day one, they never investigated this thing further. In fact, they went out of their way to kill off the investigation.
And then there's the color of the brain, how long it has been
the brain.
formaldehyde. that was so
Fake brain. It's a fake brain that's there. It's nobody else's brain because it was a hospital where they did autopsies. No, that was somebody else's brain for sure because the nurses, the people at Parkland, everybody saw the cerebellum dripping from his skull. The shot there was dripping on the floor of the Parkland Hospital. And by the time, they got to it's a strange story, but frankly, the brain, they weighed this official brain, and the brain weighs as much as a normal person, which is impossible given the circumstances of the dripping brain.
Right. So that's the chunk that we saw, right? The chunk that you see that Jackie O grabs.
Yeah, she's trying to retrieve the skull pieces, and she's trying to do something to help him.
Yeah.
She really was shocked, and she reached out on the back of the hood, and that wonderful Secret Service agent, the only one who reacted, by the way, the only one, Clint Hill, ran up on the car and jumped on the car. That was their job.
Right.
The Secret Service protection that day was just awful. There was supposed to be motorcycles on both sides of the car. There seems to have been a lapse, and the car slows down when he gets that first shot. The car almost stops. Why isn't the driver? He's a professional driver. He's trained. When you drive. When you get shots like that, you speed up. There's dozens of these details. I don't want to go on and on, but it really is depressing that this country, in the matter of the shooting of a president, has gotten the worst kind of investigation, clumsiest, as if no one wanted to know the truth.
Right.
Which is what we also examined the Warren Commission and the details of how they came to be, and we.
Reminds me of another investigation. Now that we're thinking of sham investigations, maybe something called the Mueller report. Remember that? Remember when they couldn't find any evidence of collusion or any of those things? But the public discourse and the media reporting was all about how it proved Russiagate. These people are paid liars. These people are murderers and thieves. They're not good people. The CIA, the NSA, our intelligence community, the military-industrial complex. They aren't good people.
Out, of course, that basically running the show of the Warren Commission is Alan Dulles, who was fired as the chief of the CIA by Kennedy as a result of the Bay of Pigs in '61. Dulles was no friend of Kennedy, and he was around the whole scene after he was fired. He was around the whole scene for a while. He even went to Dallas to sell his book right before the assassination. So we point a lot of the finger at Dulles as a manager anyway, I think. And because of CIA's records, the CIA conceals everything. They didn't cooperate really with the ARB. They stonewalled them on every account. And this is a shame. So did the Secret Service, but files just didn't show up. They weren't no interest in helping them to solve this case. The CIA has always acted like a suspicious defendant from the beginning. And that's why, of course, I pointed fingers at it in 1991.
Damn fucking straight.
It seems to be that it was organized at a high level. And they used the mob. Yes, they used Jack Ruby, who was a thug who killed the main witness. Because if Oswald had talked, there would have been tremendous problems, confusions, revelations. And the mob was around the Cuban exile community who were anxious to get rid of Castro. And they hated Kennedy. Many of them hated Kennedy because he failed to get Castro, both at the Bay of Pigs and then a year later at the October missile crisis, which is a huge deal, by the way. It's much underrated what happened in 62. So the events of 62, I believe, led directly to 63. And he was marked. He was marked for that.
He was marked. He's making trouble by making enemies in the intelligence community and firing the head of the CIA. He's making trouble in the sense that he didn't really support the Bay of Pigs, but it was already a plan that was going ahead, and he wound up giving the go-ahead, and it wound up becoming a failure. He made enemies with the military-industrial complex. He made enemies with the intelligence community. These people, they wanted to ramp up tensions with Russia. They wanted to manufacture more weapons. They wanted their hands all over Cuba to use it as a hotspot. The mob wanted their hands in there. The corporations wanted their hands in there. Look at what Cuba used to be during Bautista before the Cuban Revolution. It was a asset for criminals and corporations of the United States to absolutely deplete at their will. And Kennedy, for all his faults, maybe thought that the president should be in charge of intelligence and not the people, charged with providing the president with intelligence. He thought maybe the dog should wag the tail and the tail shouldn't wag the dog. But here, let's keep going.
Why? Because of Cuba, but also because of Vietnam. He was pulling out, and new records show that. And 3, the Soviet Union. That was a big one. That was a big snowball because he was looking for détente. He had a relationship with Khrushchev after.
You can't be for peace. You must understand this. He was for peace. He was for détente. It's a big no-no.
After the missile
for the masters.
And what did they do? They signed the Nuclear Test Ban Treaty, which is an amazing event. It's the first time since World War II that the United States and Russia have been able to make an agreement. It's really amazing piece of history. Kennedy, it was a major achievement, he said, of his administration. He got it signed in September of 63, 2 months before he was killed. And in this country, you don't go for peace. When you go for peace, you make enemies. A lot of people in government get fed by this machine, this military-industrial complex. CIA did not want peace with Russia. They wanted to get a bigger and bigger budget. Kennedy was wanting to cut the budget. So you have all these issues. And I think what matters today, well, I'm going to let you lead to a question. But
yeah, I mean, I'm really curious because obviously when JFK came out, which I thought was a fantastically entertaining, interesting movie at the time, it was one of the last movies that I think gripped the attention of the whole country in a way other than as a piece of entertainment, right? It was a cultural sort of lodestar, right? And but you took a significant amount of flack for that movie at the time. There was a lot of criticism, about some fact check details and that sort of thing. You must have had a lot of time between then and now to think about what you might have done differently. And I was really struck by the difference in approach between that film and this one, which seems very much like you went through methodically all the evidence for the official story this time around and focused a lot more on that than on the dramatic story of the conspirators could I ask about your thought process and what you were setting out to do?
Oh, yeah, sure. It's simple. I mean, I was a movie maker.
Yeah.
And you have to make movies. They have to make money. You have to continue in this business. I wanted to make an exciting movie about a very serious subject, a grim subject. Most people wouldn't go to that movie unless they were told it was something exciting about it. So I didn't lie or I didn't change. I didn't fictionalize anything. I dramatized. I condensed with witnesses. I, of course, had to shape the story to give it. But the biggest revelations in that movie were the same that emerge still to this day about the military-industrial complex and the Vietnam War and the Russia detente. He was moving in that direction. Everything that's come out since then points in that direction. More files, we declassified May 63, where he tells McNamara, his Secretary of Defense, tells the Army chiefs, we want to get these first 1,000 troops out by 63, and we're going to do the rest by 65. Kennedy and McNamara said very clearly, we are coming out of Vietnam, win or lose. It's their war. Kennedy was not going to go into Cuba. That was very clear, and he probably got killed because of it. He couldn't go into Cuba. He said, why am I going to go into Vietnam, which is 6,000 miles away? Cuba's 90 miles away. It makes no fucking sense.
Which is why you start off the movie with this address by Kennedy talking about not just peace in our time, but peace in all times.
Yep.
When's the last time any president has talked about peace? I mean, Bernie Sanders is very mild-manneredly maybe brought it up once or twice in a couple of his presidential campaign runs. But when's the last time you heard someone talk about peace? It's always about war. It's always about projection of power. It's always about holding people accountable, holding nations accountable, protecting the freedom of citizens elsewhere when we don't even guarantee the freedoms written and enshrined in the Constitution to our own citizens. I mean, we don't talk about peace anymore. It's all about war. This country is built on war.
Implying that that's the motive for getting rid of him, is that he had an unacceptable.
Matt, you follow the scene. I mean, when do you ever hear a president anymore talk about peace, just
right.
Pure peace? I mean, they don't have that conversation.
Right.
It's always about what we have to do about this threat or that threat, and we have to be tough on the Russians, we have to be tough on the Chinese. We live in this perpetual state of aggression and tension. That keeps the fluid going, I guess. You know, in the movie, Donald Sutherland says to Kevin Costner, he says, the organizing principle of society is war, the preparation for war. That's what I'm not quoting directly, but preparation for war is more important than war. And that's what we've been doing. We've been preparing for wars over and over again in redundant machinery, costs, budgets. It doesn't end. Not since Kennedy, and this is a major point, not since President Kennedy in 63 has one American president, think about it, been able to limit and control the military and its budget and the intelligence agencies.
Modern day, the military budget increases without presidents even asking for it. And when they do ask for an increase, it's always increased more than what they even asked for. They blew JFK's fucking head off, and they run the show now.
You can't go there. Even when Trump, who we agree is a little bit crazy, but when he made threats on the intelligence agencies, right? He was warned, wasn't he? Wasn't it Shermer who said, you can't.
Schumer said that 6 ways to Sunday.
Yeah, 6 ways to Sunday, yeah.
It's a terrible situation.
Really.
What they're referring to is the time a sitting U.S. Senator Chuck Schumer from New York, was on one of the Sunday talk shows. And they're talking about Trump and how he's picking a fight with someone in the CIA or whatever. And Schumer saying, I would never do that if I was him. You know, he's a dummy because everyone knows that the intelligence community has 6 ways to Sunday to get you back. So that's a sitting senator admitting that they run the show. The intelligence community runs the show. Because if you're not in line with their agenda, they have 6 ways to Sunday. And he's also admitting in public on a Sunday show that, he's also like, duh, and why would the president even think to go against them? Like, our country is not a democracy. This isn't a democracy.
Younger people like you are really fucked because he was killed. If he had succeeded, like a Roosevelt succeeded in controlling his government, and Kennedy said clearly to de Gaulle and many other people, he said, I'm not sure I'm in charge of this government.
That was
Because
the scary part.
he knew that the CIA was operating off the shelf. The military hated him, and that's a very important thing to study. If you don't know your history about this America, you're going to be very confused about the present day because we're the result of that. I mean, if Kennedy had succeeded, we'd be in a whole different place.
There you have it. I mean, Oliver Stone, I love the guy. I just love the way his brain thinks. Unfortunately, every time I watch his works, I always get so depressed because he has this great ability to bring in the what if. I mean, it gives me hope because it's like, oh, that's a potential future we could have had, or a potential existence we could have had, we could always still work towards it. But like here, when he's saying, if only Kennedy had succeeded, if only he had lived and that hadn't happened, we would be dealing with a different reality today, because maybe then the president would still be running the executive branch. Right now we have members of the intelligence community, members of the military, members of weapons contractors. They're really running the show at this point. And he also really depressed me when he, in his historical series, when he talked about the death of FDR, and also FDR switching his VP from Wallace to Truman during the Democratic primary in his last campaign before he became president, and ultimately he died as president, and then Truman took over, and that allowed for basically the entire Cold War to develop. If FDR had lived, there would have been cooperation and competition with Russia. If Wallace had remained as the VP and then took over as president upon FDR's death, it would have even been further left-wing. It would have been closer to a utopia, closer to, I mean, it wouldn't be utopia, right? But we would have at least been starting on that path, because there would have been 2 major powers left in the world, the United States and the Soviet Union, and there wouldn't have been a Cold War. There wouldn't have been the nuclear bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, because that was the beginning of the people who killed Kennedy taking the reins. FDR died. Weak president like Truman, who's going to be the yes man and listen to what the corporate overlords and military overlords say, and they tell him to drop that fucking bomb and let Russia know that we're the fucking boss. And he does it twice. And then we have, the rest of history. Look at what's happened. America becomes a belligerent empire, becomes the hegemon of the world, and we have engaged in endless war, and we have brutalized the entire planet. So yeah, I love Oliver Stone. Great interview. He has a full interview on Substack with these guys. I would definitely check it out if I was y'all. I would check it out.
I speak of peace, therefore, as the necessary, rational end of rational men. I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears. But we have no more urgent task. Our problems are man-made, Therefore, they can be solved by man, and man can be as big as he wants. No problem of human destiny is beyond human beings. Man's reason and spirit have often solved the seemingly unsolvable, and we believe they can do it again. And if we cannot end now our differences, at least we can help make the world safe for diversity. For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures, and we are all mortal.